following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Network, and welcome to another episode of The Packaged Tourist, hosted by the Packaged Tourist in the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase, who tonight will be discussing the evil legacy of Charles Manson on the 85th anniversary of his birth, and how, even though Charles Manson is dead, Mansonism remains alive and well and is presently occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as well as the halls of Congress.
Thank you, Ralph. Tonight, I'm going to discuss the dark legacy of the late Charles Manson on the 85th anniversary of his birth, and also the approaching 50th anniversary of when he, along with those in the Manson family who helped him, were indicted for committing the Tate LaBianca murders. Charles Manson has been physically dead, thank God, for over a year now, but his malignant presence still haunts the American consciousness. During 2019, there was a plethora of book releases dealing with Manson and the Manson women and the Tate LaBianca murders themselves. There were attendant documentaries as well. Even Hollywood got into the act with the summer release of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Manson and his murderous family are key peripheral figures in the highly entertaining movie. What's fascinating is that for half a century, Manson was able to enthrall, tantalize, and inspire fear, even from behind bars. How many times during the past half-century did we behold his wide-eyed, maniacal glare, his murderous sound bites? Manson was using sound bites long before the term was even invented. His bizarre doublespeak that only he and his followers could understand. Many of America's top TV journalists and pundits took a stab at trying to decipher Charles Mills Manson. Tom Snyder, Geraldo Rivera, Charlie Rose, and Diane Sawyer all had their days with Manson. Personally, my favorite is the Tom Snyder interview. Snyder was always so used to having power and control during his interview sessions with celebrities who needed Snyder's imprimatur to advance their careers. But Manson humorously refused to be intimidated by Snyder's smug presence. Instead, during the interview, he reduced Snyder to sputtering anger and frustration because Manson controlled the interview throughout the show with his antics and word games. When you see the footage, one can almost laugh at it, except that it's not funny at all because Manson was officially responsible for the brutal deaths of 9 innocent people: Gary Hinman, Stephen Parent, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Sharon Tate, Leno LaBianca, Rosemary LaBianca, and Donald Shorty Shea. That is the thing people seem to forget when reliving Manson's grotesque performances, and they were performances. Manson had the power to control the lives of nearly 24 young people, program them to commit crimes which ultimately led to the murders of 9 people and quite more if you believe Manson family folklore and legend. He was able to command sex and death with a word or a gesture. He was able to convince his followers that he was God, Jesus Christ, Satan, the infinite soul, and those were his official aliases when he was arrested. Although he was technically on probation from 1967 to 1969, he was able to avoid being sent back to prison, although during those 2 years he committed enough crimes to have his parole revoked even before he ordered the 9 murders for which he was convicted. Like Adolf Hitler, whom Manson admired, Charles Mills Manson for a time had the luck of the devil, and that led to the destruction of innocent lives and scarring and psychologically maiming of countless other lives. Manson's helter-skelter predicted the ultimate race war would come, which would lead to the annihilation of most of the white race, with the exception of Manson and his family, who would be living underground, in hiding, waiting for the race war to end, by militant Black America, back then epitomized by the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam, aka the Black Muslims. once white America was annihilated, then the triumphant African American victors would try to rebuild society, but would quote-unquote supposedly fall short. And Manson's racist, fascist, satanic eyes, African Americans were incapable of any type of productivity. Whereupon Manson and his family, quote-unquote, a pure white master race, would subjugate and enslave all black people once more, and so Charles Mills Manson would rule the world with his murderous family enforcing his rule. Sadly, thanks to the GOP and the Donald, we are far closer now to realizing Manson's vision of helter-skelter than ever before. 50 years after Manson ordered 9 murders to bring about helter-skelter, America is approaching a flashpoint where racial tensions have magnified 1,000-fold, where overt racism is blatantly rearing its head throughout all sectors of America, where individuals filled with such blatant race hatred and sectarian hatred are willing to travel hundreds of miles to those areas of non-white America and eagerly commit mass murder to bring about the ultimate race war, which will in turn lead to the overthrow of democracy, not only in America, but throughout the world as well. On a weekly basis, we see on the nightly news channel stories of people becoming racist vigilantes, denying non-white citizens their rights or access to those amenities or luxuries enjoyed by white citizens. We see police forces throughout America using deadly force as the first resort instead of as the last resort when dealing not only with African Americans but with any non-white citizens at all. Indeed, the proliferation of deliberately provocative acts of racism has intensified thanks to the subtle encouragement of the present occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Indeed, Mansonism remains alive and well and living in the White House. We have a so-called president who refuses to condemn racist violence or racist vigilantism, who has been endorsed by these racist and fascist groups and refused to disavow himself of these endorsements, and who has bragged at conservative luncheons that he has motorcycle gangs backing his play, which, interesting enough, Manson tried to do in the days, weeks, and months leading up to the 9 murders he ordered. Manson, like the Donald, wanted to recruit motorcycle gangs to serve as foot soldiers in his helter-skelter, but was unsuccessful in his goal, whereas Trump apparently has succeeded in that aim. In many ways, the Donald and Charles Manson represent 2 sides of the same debased, satanic, depraved counterfeit currency. If Manson had been born rich, then he would have become like Trump. If Trump had been born poor, then he would have ended up like Manson, and hopefully one day Trump and his ilk will end up like Manson, behind bars for the rest of their natural-born lives. The similarities are disturbing. Both were racists, although Manson was more overtly so. Both were blatant misogynists who used and abused women for their sordid ends. Both worshiped fascist figures. Manson, like the good Satanist he was, worshipped Hitler even to the point of carving swastikas on his forehead, while Trump worships Vladimir Putin and Kim Il-jung, nakedly lusting for the same absolute murderous power both dictators possess. Both commanded hypnotic holds over their followers. Indeed, when confronted with the obvious truth of the lies, hypocrisies, and self-serving natures of their messages issued by their God and Master, their followers would respond with the same ideological gibberish fed to them by their godless gurus. Both, like the good con men they were and are, were perfect mirrors reflecting back the evil they elicited from their followers, enhancing and magnifying it to the horrific levels, converting it into personal and or political power, and sending it forth into all corners of America and the world, thus leading to the manipulation, corruption, and or destruction of innocent people. In Robert Hendrickson's 1974 documentary film Manson, which incidentally was nominated for an Academy Award, there's a scene where members of the Manson family explain Manson, stating, and I quote, "Charlie is you. He reflects you. He is your reflection. If you're guilty, then he reflects guilt back at you because we're all guilty of the whole thing," unquote, which indeed they were. But Donald, like Charles Mills Manson, is the reflection of the lesser angels that lurk about America. He has done more to elicit, expose, and promulgate the latent racism, sexist subjugation, sectarian hatred, and the xenophobic cruelty and homophobic violence that has existed in this country since Jamestown was founded in 1607. The dark thread was always there, intertwined with the brighter threads of the American tapestry. Sometimes the dark thread was covered up, but it was still there, nestled in the folds of the American flag. Today, the dark threads have burst out from the seams of the American tapestry, obscuring all the other bright colors of the American landscape, as if vandals had spray-painted an artistic masterpiece. What is saddening and shocking, though really not surprising, is how many people in America want so badly to express the same cruelties, the same forms of ignorance, the same forms of sadism, sexism, racism that Trump espouses. How many people in America are yearning to commit vigilante retaliatory violence against anyone who dares to expose or challenge his evil, illicit stranglehold over America? In this year alone, we have seen individuals, again, driving hundreds and hundreds of miles, crossing state lines just to commit mass murder on innocent people because they were inspired by Donald Trump. But then Manson himself, when he orchestrated the 9 murders he and his followers were convicted of, was engaging in retaliation against the establishment as well. Manson had sought fame and fortune in Hollywood, but had been rejected because what he was espousing did not fit in with the peace, love, and flowers mentality of his peers of the time. And, in his rage, and perhaps motivated by other factors as well, known only to Manson, he sent forth his followers to kill those who had rejected him. I have always believed that if Manson had emerged in 2017 instead of 1967 when he was released from prison, he might have succeeded in finding fame for himself. Given his seductive powers, his command of catchy sound bites, like, for instance, "Come to now," "No sense makes sense," "You can't kill," "Are you ready to die, then live forever," which, ladies and gentlemen, are actual Mansonisms. The atmosphere of kinky sex which he used to seduce, hold, and indoctrinate his followers, his apocalyptic views on race and helter-skelter, I suspect some idiot producer in Hollywood would have signed Manson and his family up as stars of some depraved fascist reality TV series, like the Duck Dynasty, whose political and racial views are not that far removed from those of Manson. I'm not kidding, ladies and gentlemen. If you go to YouTube and type in the name of Charles Manson, you will find innumerable videos of Manson's parole hearings or his interviews with, like Tom Snyder, Diane Sawyer et al., or documentaries on Manson and his crimes. And when you see those videos, like I have from time to time, you will find comments from people all over the world who truly believe that Manson was a prophet without honor in this country, that they believe he was preaching some truly messianic message. The late Vincent Bugliosi, who prosecuted Manson, has always maintained that if Manson ever got out, he would have commanded an instant horde of followers, a view which I agreed with. Even after his death, Manson still mesmerizes and controls those weak enough to listen to it. And so it is too with the Donald. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about conservative cults of personality and how the Donald cult is corrupting and infecting America. The Donald cult is no different from the Manson cult, with the exception that the Donald, unlike Manson, commands genuine political power in America and is willing to use it to destroy innocent people. You see so-called quote-unquote Christians proclaiming the Donald as an extension of genuine quote-unquote Christian ideals, even though there is nothing in his life that even remotely approximates true Christian behavior. These same so-called quote-unquote Christians are quite willing to sign on to his racist, sexist, homophobic, sectarian holy war against any and all who oppose the Donald. They are willing to attack, maim, and kill to defend the Donald's perverted ideology. They are desperate to replace education and wisdom and tolerance with fascist ideologies that encourage the bestial aspects of the human condition, an ideology that reduces instead of builds up, an ideology that devolves and degenerates humanity instead of evolving and improving humanity. One of Charles Manson's followers told Robert Hendrickson in 1972, quote, "I became Charlie. Everything I once was Charlie. There is nothing left of me anymore. And all the people in the family, there's nothing left of them anymore. They're all Charlie too," unquote. I can relate to what that Manson follower said, because 2 weeks ago when I told the story about some so-called Christian who tried to convert me to his fascist fake Christianity in April 2018, he angrily, coldly, and cruelly told me that I couldn't be myself anymore, that I was not allowed to read or think anymore, that I was supposed to obey him since he was preaching God's will, and all the while he was doing so. He's preaching God's will, and all the while he was doing so, I kept thinking about Manson, that it felt, I wondered, is that what it was like being on the receiving end of a Manson indoctrination session? It's interesting, when Manson was preaching his satanic gospel, he too banned books, calendars, newspapers, and other contacts of the outside world. He didn't want his followers to think, but merely to act and obey his perverted vision. At the Manson trial, Charlie told the world about his followers, quote, "There are many, many more coming in the same direction. They are running in the street, and they are coming right at you," unquote. 50 years after his crimes, Mansonism still lives and lurks in the streets and homes of America, and in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., and in the halls of Congress. Using the same wicked tricks and tactics that Donald commands millions of followers, and they too are coming in the same direction. They are running in the streets, and they are coming right at us with intentions to subjugate, destroy, and kill. Remember, as the 18th century British parliamentarian Edmund Burke once said, "For evil to flourish, it is required that the good do nothing." And that's why I'm doing this podcast tonight. It's to warn people and let them know we've got to do something. We've got to put a stop to this. We can't remain silent. We cannot remain passive. We've got to organize, mobilize, and put a stop to this Mansonism and this Trumpism that is corrupting and destroying our country. Next week, I will be interviewing hockey writer Matthew Blittner, who has just released his second book, Unforgettable New Jersey Devils, Games, and Moments from the Press Box, Ice, and Front Office. Thank you, and good night.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.